皆様、建築情報学会ウィーク2024にご参加ありがとうございます。本日は基調講演に、プリツカー賞受賞建築家であられます、モーフォシスのトン・メイン氏を迎えることができたことを光栄に思います。メイン氏は、研究と革新に根ざした建築都市デザインの実践集団として、モーフォシスを1972年に設立されまして、代表作としてコーネル大学ブルームバーグセンターやペロ自然科学博物館、クーパーユニオンアカデミックビルディングなど、文化、公共、学術機関のための革新的かつサステナブルな設計で知られておりまして、2005年にはプリツカー賞を受賞され、2013年にはアメリカ建築家協会ゴールドメダルを受賞。メイン氏は教育の学術の分野でも積極的に活動してこられ、よく知られておりますように、1972年には南カリフォルニア建築大学の設立メンバーとして設立に参加され、その後、コロンビア大学、イェール大学、ハーバード大学、オランダのベルラーヘインスティテュート、ロンドン大学バートレット校など、世界各地で教鞭を捉えてこられました。本講演は英語で行われますけれども、日本語字幕が付けられますので、そちらもご利用ください。それでは、メイン氏の基調講演を始めさせていただきたいと思います。Thom, thank you very much for joining us today. And we are very honored to have you as a keynote speaker. So please go ahead, your lecture.
Sitaro, when you asked me to do this, it was interesting because we worked together, and I was very confident that you could explain this in ways that you were part of the evolution of our firm as we were shifting from classical ways of producing architecture, which is 500 years old plus whatever, through drawings and maquettes, etc. That was starting to make a transition through the digital age. And the projects, the conversation would have to start from an architect in terms of the role of the process having to do with your particular interest in architecture. And with me, it's going to be very, I think, somewhat clear, and that from very early kind of thinking in terms of the language of architecture and the issues in architecture I was interested in, it started with relationships and interconnectedness, and it was challenging the singularity of the object. And it was interested in something that was much more complex, but that was very much about a dialogue and a conversation. And well, you start and you have these various methods which come out of this tradition, and it's sketchbooks and it's drawing, and you're searching for a direction having to do with the language of architecture, and it's hugely intuitive and subjective, etc., and it takes all different kinds of forms. But what was key, and what I was part of with a group of people that I was interested in, and I belonged to a certain tradition where the drawing was extremely important in the development of the idea. And in my case, the drawings took many different forms in terms of their material and their direction. And they were searching for conceptual organizational ideas, and they were connected to different notions of making, construction, material, etc. In different cases. And so with the 6 feet drawings, you could say it was as much about the constructional act and something alluding to material, etc., as much as it was to a notion of kind of rethinking organizational ideas, which were challenging the whole notion of part whole. And these drawings immediately led to there were a conceptual thinking, because when half an hour now when we talk about the digital, it's going to be a complete conversation. They were done within the tradition of planned section, and so you are responsible for the connection of these abstract ideas as you see something that has to do with a vertical kind of an idea, and you have something to do with a horizontal plan. And of course, there was still the notion of plan as a generator, the notion of the drawings in themselves as the generation of both the ideas and the documentation of something you're about to construct, right? And then I put this one little piece in here, the second drawing to the right, the computer showing up. So this must be about 1990, and we're looking at a Mac 1, and I'm still looking for the human character within the computer and the eccentricity that you can still find, because it was a bit too purely kind of rigid mathematically and geometrically for the interest it was having. And again, this is going to connect to your interests. And everything you're going to look at has to do with series of fragments and partial elements that are making up a new construct of whole. Because I'm interested in relationships, etc., and it's now finding its resolve in the work. And then with this, of course, we're looking at the conversation between the drawing and as part of a thinking process and the work. And there's this reciprocity back and forth. So the drawing is now affecting the building is now the construction of the building is now affecting the nature of how you draw and how you use the drawings, etc. And there's going to be this kind of continued interest in drawings that are now part model, part drawings. There's going to be a conversation between the physical thing, the drawing, and its physical manifestation in an abstract sense. And it's going to be it's going to get more and more kind of rigorous. So you're going to look at sections, and again, as we get to the digital world, it's going to be another notion. We're producing a couple dozen sections of a building, and we're extremely kind of rigorous of the importance of the drawing as it develops a complex, multi-dimensional kind of thing, right? And again, the computer is going to start creeping in, and we're producing as the work gets larger in scale. We're at the limits of both drawing and model making in both the terms of the increased scale and the increased complexity of the piece of work as it reaches more of a, let's say, an urban scale in this case. And again, you're looking at an early idea that came out of the computer, which is a broad forming. And something's going to take place now that, again, a lot of you in the audience looking backwards, the first idea is starting to become three-dimensional as a singular thing. And it's thought about now in a very different way as we conceive it through the digital world versus drawing from the abstraction of plan and section. And this is now going to be extremely important in kind of all the work after this. And it might be, I'm trying to think what you would be interested in. I'm assuming I'm talking to young students, and you're looking at somebody that started architecture in a very different way than you did, that started with this classical method, so that if this is useful to you, you're going to be looking also at the possibility of using analog, of looking at traditional methods as you look at your own work. And it's going to be much more hybridized in terms of kind of how you kind of approach the work. Because what this is doing also is it forms you as you make drawings that you have to contain in your brain, the synthesis that you put this thing together by connecting these abstract drawings of plan and section. And it's a very, very different way of conceiving something. And again, there's going to be this period in between where we're still drawing in conventional terms, and we're now starting to put these things together three-dimensionally with the advancement of the complexity that the digital world, and we're still drawing conventionally. We're making conventional sections, but they're actually produced digitally. And we haven't quite yet kind of figured out how to kind of make those, I'm going to talk about in a minute. And the notion of interconnection of multiple systems that produce a piece of work, if you look at the complete left, we're now able to kind of articulate multiple systems and start overlaying those, and now testing it through construction that takes back to the idea of how we're developing this. And what's happening with the digital world is we're able to move in a quicker way, and we're able to now connect the multiple systems, and we have a system that has an ability to operate in geometric mathematical terms that allows us to produce something much more complex in terms of this the relational kind of aspect of the work. And then there's going to be a moment when there's a leap made that we're producing a piece of work for a competition, and it's now starting from a digital place. And now the left section, there's a complete kind of shift, and it's no longer thought about in conventional terms. It's a section, it's a CAT scan. And we understand we can cut this thing at within any set of terms we wish. So this is at a 1 meter piece, and we can understand the nature of what that allows us to interpret within this complex organization, the way a cardiosurgeon would be looking at your left chamber, right? And it's a way of describing something. And it's getting much clearer that the use of the section is just a method of understanding something in certain terms. And there's another thing happening with the digital world. The notion of conception and perception are coming together, that we can crawl in this thing we made and look at it from a human scale. And again, that's going to be an enormous kind of shift, which is available to you, that you're now allowed to kind of make something as an abstract thing, and it's within the architectural realm, meaning it's occupied and it connects to the human scale, and you can now understand it in those terms, and you can make you can evaluate the ideas in terms of how the ideas are perceived and used. And then, of course, with that comes language, and this is now ubiquitous, that it opened up from the Cartesian language and the notion of the singularity of the right angle and the straight line and the extrusion of plan. Everything got changed, and you can now take a form and you can move it at will. And I remember when we were looking at this competition, it was just startling to me that I was used to making many drawings of looking at complex forms. And all of a sudden I could be sitting with somebody and would look at this thing, and within 2 minutes, I could be looking at dozens of different shapes. And of course, that's how we work today. But what it really did, and my essence at this point in my life, I'm going to say it's both an opportunity and a problem. It opened up the possibility of form mapping that was more or less infinite. And that same notion of all things being possible, of course, in any artistic activity is also a problem, because now one has to make decisions of the nature of the meaning of that kind of gesture, et cetera, and what the rules are that allow you, right, to move in one direction or another. And then there's going to be a kind of a little shift here, because I'm going to move into kind of another territory, because there's going to be now a connection of construction and conceiving, and the thinking of thing in conceptual terms, and its realization. And we were doing this one little simple house, and we were not interested in the conventional drawing process, and we put it together in terms of parts and a method of putting those parts together. And it ended up being a precursor to something that was going to be absolutely kind of essential as this other world, and we're drawing by hand, of course, right? As this other world kind of appears in front of us. And so again, these projects are getting larger, and now the drawing process, the documentation of this thing we're inventing, the digital is now becoming more and more important. And again, it's collapsing the traditional notion of plan section elevation to make something that's complex, that is harder and harder to even understand within two-dimensional kind of thinking. And it requires the tools we work with need to advance to be compatible and to be in alignment with the types of projects we're doing. And we're realizing we need to advance the technology of the discipline that allows us to advance the thinking and complexity of the tasks that are in front of us. And this now is going to become a part of it's going to be an absolute part of the studio. And what's going to take place is there's going to be a seamless connection, or a continued kind of flow of information and thinking from conception through construction. So this notion of designing is going to be very kind of fluid as we move it into its translation of the articulation of materials and the shaping of materials and how they go together to produce a piece of work. So Tori, I think I think this is you, am I correct?
Correct.
Yeah. And we're I would think what it's most interesting for, I'm talking to young architects, it's now giving you just incredibly extensive responsibilities of realizing your ideas and being able to look at multiple alternatives and to really extend the whole notion of what you're doing as an architect. So we're working at a particular facade, and the facade is about performance is one thing. It removes heat from the building, and it operates environmentally in terms of making a responsible building in those terms. It's now understanding facade as surface, right? And that surface now opens up huge opportunities. So in this case, it's you, and I'm showing you just a few drawings, and you can explain the rest. But we're looking at multiple notions of looking at that surface, and we're asking questions. And one of them is, oh, that's interesting. Can the surface actually have three-dimensional qualities? And can the surface have a degree of variation which challenges self-similarity? So it's not the same module moving across, and it's a dimension, it's a 5 foot by a 12-foot dimension of glass, and et cetera. They were completely open for new opportunities. And we can look at huge numbers of variations, and we can do it within extremely rigorous economic terms. It's not a building that we had endless amount of money. It's quite the opposite. It's a quite taut project. And then not only that, as you know, that the third drawing over, we can map this and show the subcontractor how to put it on the building. So we've integrated ourselves into construction, where it's moved from the most conceptual thinking to the absolutely most pragmatic notion of building something, where we're building it piece by piece. And again, you might explain there, I can show this could be a whole lecture, that we can now take a raw piece of aluminum and actually show you how to cut it to get 100% of the material and not throw anything away. And we did that for the contractor. And we're now, we're involved in a level of intelligence that is going beyond the constructional ability within a particular culture, right? And we're very much engaged with them if showing them how to do something within a more sophisticated way that gets us this, right? And it's, again, I would think going to be something that's going to continue in architecture, and it's going to expand the role of the architect as we get more and more engaged in the intelligence of making things. And as we understand the nature of how it connects to our original design idea through the notion of construction, and with construction comes the method of delivery, right? And it's a dynamic process of kind of how this thing is made. And again, this is going to start influencing, it's going to be institutionalized within the studio. And in some ways, again, you figure out how to translate this. It's going to be a connection of a development of an office that starts as a very small, intimate office working on small projects. And it's going to move through the offices. We're now working on large institutional projects. And it still finds, let's say, the human hand or the human character that's still building these things, right? And I'm extremely kind of interested in that, as you know. And again, we're continually kind of pushing an envelope. So now we're using GFRC. We're producing something at a different scale. We're in the shop. We're designing. It's a continuation of the process, and we're going to spend a year working with these people, producing something that operates. And again, we have the jacket. It's the second skin. And we can talk about it now in pure environmental performance. We could talk about it as a design idea. We could talk about it in terms of its constructional processes, the making process. And it's all becoming more and more seamless. And that same thing is now going to expand to the interior. We're going to make an interior facade. In this case, we're using the product of the client. They research high-tech materials, and we're using the materials they make for the product of architecture. And in making this highly contextual, right? And we're using the same kind of thinking that allows us, what is it now? We're discussing a feedback loop, which becomes essential and maybe kind of unique to the art of architecture, where again, you're working from ideas through the development of the idea and through its construction and through the evaluation of the construction. It's a feedback loop back to the thinking of design. And it's going to take you again to a different place in designing in your next piece of work. And again, this is going to take place in all kinds of kind of unique conditions. A huge amount of the work is going to have certain areas of intensification. It's not all kind of designed in the same kind of level of intensity. And in this case, the main space for Cooper Union. And again, we now have tools that we can produce things that we can't even draw, that we now necessitates the digital tools, and the relationship between us biologically and us cyborg and digitally are coming together, and we're using our own decision-making processes. We have now tools of things that we can't produce under the old system. and again, many of you maybe start with this, but again, the conversation of this would be its relationship to the broader thinking of the building, and it's about connective tissue. It's about a vertical piazza. It's about advancing conversation between artists and architects and engineers, which is the basis of the school, and its basis is social. So we're looking at it, the complete right is a vertical social space, and we wanted that to be the memorable notion of the image of Cooper Union as a school, right? And so again, there's a direct connection between the aesthetic, the technological, and the broader cultural purpose, right? That have to be in alignment. And then this becomes now ubiquitous, that they're developing kind of a thinking of a public space of a museum, and we're able to think about it in very different terms. And it's if you go back to the beginning of the talk, at the drawings, you could say we've just about shifted professions, that we're approaching things in such a different way, right? No plan, no section, no static. We're looking at it dynamically. We're going to understand. We're going to move through it dynamically. And again, I'm just showing you this is a little quick lecture. These are just little pieces. Each one of these, we could stop and have 20, 30-minute conversation. There's no question. And then that same thing, we can kind of move through. I remember going back at the beginning, we were discussing you can crawl in the thing and move through it, and you have some understanding right on the left of the nature of this thing related to the human character and kind of how it operates as a building. And it's dynamic, right? And then it's translating into a model still, and the model still allow us to understand in a very simple way the outcome of our ideas prior to construction. But they in themselves are now made with technology that we can't make really by hand, right? And they are seen in dynamic terms. That gets us this. And again, most of these projects would have to do with certain areas of intensification, which is going to align with the public nature of the building. It'd be the more intense cores that'll be the most intense kind of part of an architecture. And then again, as the work gets larger and it becomes more just about city making, all of these techniques come into balance. But we're going to go back and forth, and there's still notions of plan, right? But it's very kind of clear now the nature of why we're drawing plan and the usefulness of that particular drawing. It's no longer the generator of the thing, because you're going to see that here. This was the E&I headquarters in Milan, and they're an oil conglomerate, and we had an idea of the stratification of geography and the notion of oil as being the organic layer. And we were going to document that as the skin of the organizational idea of the building. And again, it comes out of a set of drawings which are going to be abstract, that come from the digital world, and they're layers of earth that you're seeing that's moving here. And again, the conceptual drawings are now thought about within three-dimensional terms, and they're thought about within a gestalt, a totality of something, and not pieces. And the section and the plan are long gone in terms of those ideas, except when we're looking at them for particular reasons, that we understand why we need to understand a plan for simple terms of furniture layout or the distribution of functions, etc. And it takes us here. And again, if you went back to the constructional drawings, that same thing leads us to the notion of building. And on the far right, what I'm interested in, it still exhibits notions of very handmade things. And again, the same tool that allows us a seamless, that breaks the differences between concept and construction. The same thing does it. The same tool allows us to move from macro to micro, that we can operate at a macro level of the urban scheme, and we can move to the very specific level of making something that has to do with facade in this case, and it has to do with environmental performance. And then, of course, the scale becomes enormous. That as the projects increase in scale, all the conversations I'm having get ranked up in terms of the necessity of the types of tools we're using that are incommensurate with the kind of work we're doing, because we're now building fragments of cities, right? And now there's going to be a shift again. And Satoru, I did this purposely in terms of just and maybe you'll ad-lib some of the conversation in terms of the growth of the interest I have in architecture, that just like I started with sketches and drawings, I've stopped 7 years ago and started working on organizational ideas, and they're going to be three-dimensional drawings, and they come out of notions of producing complex orders that have to do with multiple forces, and looking for the organizational ideas that come out of a very disciplined kind of approach to that. And they come first, and then out of that comes a series of drawings that are documenting those, and they're conceptual CAT scans. But what would be important here is the drawing comes second. The model didn't come from the drawing. The drawings are analytical and they're conceptual. And they're going to be someplace like the early drawings. They're searching for architectural ideas, but they operate under their own autonomous terms. And I've been interested in that from the very beginning. And again, this is a tool that's extremely useful. I'm talking about the digital world now that's kind of expanding those abilities. That it glues together different art forms in terms of their delivery system. And so these drawings are models, and as they lead to ideas of architecture, there's a connection, but it's a much more relaxed kind of notion, because they can operate autonomously or they can operate much more specifically. And so here I can look at that drawing and make it into a clearly kind of a connected tissue of a whatever you want to call this. It's not a plan, it's a diagram, but it's a beginning of idea of an organization of a large complex that's a campus that's, again, at the scale of a city. And I can now take that as an idea that has to do with a very different organizational notion that's interested in maximizing differentiation, maximizing chance behavior, spontaneous conditions that are the characteristics that I'm fascinated with in the history of the city, and not looking at the simpler orders that have to do with repetition and self-similarity. And then I can quickly turn that into something that's more plan-like, that deals with the various demands we have in functional terms. And then I can layer that and discuss it systematically in 3 dimensions and start discussing how to make it and produce something that's parallel to the drawings I just showed, where you're controlling the operational strategy, but you're not in control of the final thing. It's a response of that operational strategy, and you're making choices to do that. And it's expanding my creative life to do things that are beyond my own capacity if I'm depending on a priori ideas. And then again, what's going to take place is going to be a synthesis of everything we've talked about: the conception, the responsibility for how to make it, the structure. And then you look at the building, and again, we're getting this incredibly important feedback mechanism. We're looking at something that does have the complexity where there's over 12,000 individual pieces, none of them being the same. And it's absolutely doable, and it's absolutely part of the construction industry, but we're taking responsibility for it, and it comes out of our studio as we're working with these people, right, as we make this. And now this is going to be another feedback loop. It's going to come right back to us and give us information in terms of its usefulness, in terms of our future work. And then again, as architects, we take responsibility for multiple agendas. And so we can talk about the building from the very beginning in ecological terms and tell you that a majority of its landscape, and we could talk about it within sustainable terms, et cetera, as a model for an urban model which integrates landscape and building. And of course, today, the broader conversation is landscape is man-made. So we're just looking at 2 human-made structures, one that has the tradition of typology and archaeology, and the other one which is more morphological, and both of them are programmatic. And now we're looking for, it's taking us to a place where we're looking for a different notion of differentiation that might be closer to landscape than it is traditional building. And the building is now somewhat subservient to the demands of an idea of landscape versus the other way around. Landscape is no longer servicing the building, and it's that edge. Landscape is the idea, and building is just about secondary, or the 2 are merging where you can't even separate them, might be even the clear notion. And like being able to walk through it in the computer model, you can understand this through the occupation of the building. And as you move from one end of the campus to the other, it's about 1 kilometer long. You're always engaged in inside, outside, and you're always engaged in the diversity of the conditions that have to do with this urban condition and have to do with this land condition, et cetera. And all of it comes out of that original drawing I showed you, right? That was leading us to this idea, this organizational idea. And at times is open. It's infrastructural, and it follows a lot of the rules of nature, and it's still open for interpretation and for use. Okay, step 2 of this new process. We can look at different conceptual organizational ideas, but we can now look at them. We have tools that allow look at them in more or less infinite terms. So each of these ideas I can see in dynamic terms. You're looking at 100 here, right? Again, go back a couple decades, and I'm looking at options, and I'm looking at 2 or 3 or 4, and they've been handmade. And now this is allowing a broader conversation. We can discuss these and discuss them in multiple terms in terms of where they're taking us as organizational ideas. And it's going to take us again to another direction. So I can look at the one of these abstract things, and you can look at a plan. This is a competition we won in Beijing for a park. But I was able to look at multiple options that took me to its usefulness in the development of a park, and something that's directly coming in as a critique of the last project you saw, as we're looking for a language which is integrating traditionally man-made architecture and landscape, and the two are becoming singular as an idea. And it's at the same time, of course, the park is changing, and it's no longer linked to the Arcadian notion and the kind of the passivity of landscape, but it's a highly activated park, and it's a cultural. It's a park that represents cultural activities. So it includes library and theater and music hall and tennis courts and soccer stadium, et cetera. And it connects to the contemporary condition. And again, in another park project with a set of pavilions, using that language that allows us to look very quickly at kind of options of producing a language that has some sort of a coherency. And then again, all of this is connected to a working method from the very beginning, which was reiterative. We look at something, challenge it, critique it, revise it, and start that process, and until we've exhausted the conversation. So literally every project you've seen coming out of this office goes through this process. And again, the tools we looked at expand and condense in time the number of things we can talk about and the numbers of issues that those bring about that increase the ability of us to deal with complex problems. And develop a language of a series of pavilions which define the language, but we can produce multiple variations of that language, right? And it's something that could be, again, another separate discipline. Like complex music, it has to have a discipline that allows us to even claim that these are organized, right? And then we're looking for methods of organization where the conversation would be, what I'd ask you as an audience is that, is there an agreement that these are coherent, that they are organized, they're not random, they're not arbitrary, right? And then once in a while, we even draw stuff normal, but you can draw it as I purposely not shown that stuff. You can show it as a kind of a rendering, what it looks like. Again, Satora, you know me, that's a kind of a separate conversation. I'm much more interested in the kind of exploring something, and I'm more curious of finding something I can't conceive, and I'd rather see it when it's built. So as an architect, I'm not interested in looking at it to begin with, because that means it's over with and it's dead. I need a new project. And now, right? And I don't know how you translate that, but it doesn't matter. Again, you have a tool because it's three-dimensional. You can look at it any way you prefer to look at it. Or you can decide that the client wants to see this, that they're interested in something that's more literal or something. But it definitely discusses kind of a conversation of how we show things, the terms we use in terms of what models, drawings, things that you can't quite name, etc., kind of what those tools are and how they're useful to us in terms of our own creative process. And then I'm going to end with a project that would start another conversation that as the projects become clearly urban, a technological component of a city in China, we're now at a place where I'm going to claim that our role is to find more complex systems of organization that are in line with the complexity of the problem, and that at this moment of time, architects and urban designers are somewhat limited still by the simplicity of our thinking organizationally, and that we need to, the most compelling projects of this century will be dealing with the reality of the complexity of the projects in front of us. And these projects are going to be continuous as the world continues to globalize, and that with that comes larger economic increments that allow for larger and larger projects to become normal. And we need those tools. And if there's any kind of connected tissue of everything I've talked about in terms of the usefulness of the digital world as it augments our world, or whatever the convention is of our world architecturally, that this is where it's absolutely going to be an obligation. Sitaro, thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you very much for the great lecture. So now I want to move on to a Q&A session. Is Professor Ikeda and Professor Hirano.
Yeah, thank you very much for very interesting lecture. For me, it seems to me that the purpose of both the drawing and the computers is basically same, to manipulate and create an architectural complexity and the surprise, define surprise. And you mentioned that a computer offered the opportunity to explore a tremendous number of the variations and to create a kind of configuration that was previously impossible to produce. But in other words, even though you are using it to the fullest capacity, does that not change the architectural goal itself?
Well, I mentioned in the beginning that I think this conversation would have to start with your interest in the role that your tools play in your project. So it had to start with the nature of the project. I started saying that my interest was in the complexity of relationships of things, so that helped me. So when the computer came along, it was as if, I mean, it's just a tool, a simple tool. And it was as if the tool was a tool that was invented for me. And I'm like going, somebody took care of me, because this is exactly the tool that I need, that I'm stuck, that I can't, the complexity of the mechanics of working at this, I couldn't do. And then I didn't mention information. That's a big one with the last one. With that comes the addition of information. And we have a tool that deals with the integration of information and its ability to convert that into complex organizational ideas. But it would start with a conversation with the need for that tool or not, right? And again, it didn't seem that complicated. If you're going to build something, it's not complicated why you pick up a drill or a saw. It's just you're looking for something that's useful to you for some particular task. And in this case, the one that seemed so clear was the organizational and the dealing with the nature of our physical. We concretize the world. We take ideas and make them physical, and we're limited by our methods of putting something together. And in fact, most architects probably couldn't design a 740. Most architects couldn't design my Tesla.
Yeah.
The Tesla is totally demanding on a contemporary notion of the use of a computer and the demotion of the physical object. So I have a car that uses 1/8 the moving parts.
You riding the Tesla?
Yeah, it's a computer on wheels, and it completely redefines the notion. And I think we have to catch up with the rest of the world. And what it does, of course, again, this conversation could go for a while. It challenges the physical nature of our work and kind of where we're going with the physical nature at the same time, right? And it'd be impossible today to not talk about architecture connected to the digital world and the physical world are interconnected in a way that are inescapable. And in the case of this conversation, they're inescapable in terms of the way we now think about the construction or the invention of the physical world. All right. And again, for me, what gets so interesting is that I'm able to do things that I couldn't possibly do in the conventional way. And I've been joking with people, the computer to me is Hubble. If you look at the sky, you see 100 stars, right? If you look at a Hubble, you see 1 billion. One is limited by our perception, and it's the nature of the human character, right? Or the nature of it, we put a little bit of light on the earth, and so we get rid of some stuff. You look out of Hubble, you see reality. That actually is what the world is like. And it's not a couple stars, right? It's a sea of stuff, right? And that's all. The computer just advances kind of our abilities that gives us Keister says you can deal with 7 variables simultaneously, and we can now deal with hundreds or thousands, right? With huge numbers of information. And it seems like for architects, that's a useful tool, that in fact we deal with complex problems, and you might argue we're over-invested in what things look like. And we should be invested more in a broader notion of how they perform. And if we can't do that, I was joking with Mr. Musk a couple of years ago, and I told him that he's in LA and it's Art Center, and Art Center produces all the car designers in the world. His answer, why would I do that? That's the problem. Satoru, yeah?
Yeah.
And it was like this. I took it, I got it. I said, ooh, architects are a bit in that kind of shape, right? That we've got to kind of continue to expand our notion, otherwise we ain't gonna exist. They don't need us. And the people don't, there's less and less people that actually care what a building looks like if you're completely located. And this is coming from Satoru, this is coming from me. Is totally invested, obviously, in the visual world, but you have to be realistic to the broader kind of the functions of us as architects as we build cities.
Right. Then your continuous agenda from the beginning, like your design system is evolving, but there's a certain thing which kind of we can see in the similar notion, like even in the residence of Crawford House has that sequence of column, right? That system shows up in the column, and you have like a planar surface system in the Blaze residence on the roof. But that evolved to that like later into the kind of geometric vocabulary of like a code system to like a linear path system to you keep evolving into other, but I think you are still kind of continuing and searching that system. But at the same time, I remember the discussion we had when I was there. One day you had an office-wide discussion about the combinatory approach. That was, I think, the discussion about the Las Vegas urban planning project. It was more about the relationship, the combination of elements more than the element itself. We explored a lot of design options. That was the one thing. So meaning you see tons of options and you try to find new things. But you also, to me, it looked like you were driving yourself to jump into somewhere else as well all the time. So for the exploration. So my question is that like that driving force, and what's the kind of goal of that, of your system?
You know me well enough to know that some of those questions I can't answer. I don't know why. I'm doing something and I can't tell you. It's just, I can talk around it. As architects, we connect a lot of dots, and those dots are very non sequitur. They're environmental, they're social, they're infrastructural, they're tectonic, they're city making. It goes on and on. And it seems as though we begin that quite young, and then we make certain connections of things that lead us to a certain interest of architecture. And I got fascinated with the limits of Mies and Hildesheimer particularly, and the radical self-similarity. And I would decide I was going to attack that and make something that was maximal versus minimal. And I was not interested in the subtractive language of modernism. But then certain things happened, and I'm in a certain era where people are doing things and experimenting, and it includes music, and it includes writing and film, etc. And so it seemed quite natural just to ask questions and to challenge things. And that attitude of challenging was a kind of a method of questioning that was very kind of specific, that connected to the artistic act. And then there's certain things that happen, that artists start painting and they started digging, and there were the Heisers and the Terrells, and that's going to lead to Giant for sure. Going, oh, I have the option now to do things that are more open in my world that didn't happen before. Architects kind of did this, and you lived in this kind of world, and now I live in a world where film and music and these things all kind of come together and then open up kind of options. And then after that, you start connecting dots, and you're not sure. I can never tell you why, other than I did connect those dots, and I've did it consistently, in that I show up every morning at 8 o'clock and I do it again, right? And you keep asking questions. I can't tell you. Even looking back, I can't tell you. It just kind of happens. I just took you through a sequence, and that's kind of the best I can do. I can connect the dots, and I'm somewhat aware that I've worked on one project my whole life. We did a model book. I don't know if you've seen it, the book on models. And I got response from that. Thom, you've been working on a project for 50 years. There's a singular thread through the whole project, which makes sense for probably most of us, right? That we have a certain set of attitudes, those things that comes through, and it ends up being, this is who we are. This is the aspect of our personality that finds its way to the work, that is actually the individual. Boy, that'd be interesting. Shotiki, I'm looking at what looks like the youngest person here. It's the preoccupation with the young generation on the individual. And that'd be, again, an incredibly kind of interesting conversation with the digital world, right? And in the architectural world, and in terms of the role, again, of this tool, right? And in terms of a world that's very definitely socially, and it seems it's connected to an educational model, in terms of an argument or a conversation, because I'm showing stuff as an old man, because here's the guy that started with the traditional method, etc. And I have no understanding. You can see the computer. I can turn a computer on. I have no knowledge of it. We couldn't be farther apart in terms of how our brains work, right? But I'm interested in it, what it can, its usefulness of solving certain problems, and they include very visual, artistic problems. So I'd have to show you behind me. I'm working on paintings now, and I'm working with Alan. That's Alan. And Satoru, he's my Satoru, and he operates and has a different set of capacity, and they're collective works, but it's bringing me something artistically that I'm interested in, that has to do with the definition of what a painting is, or the usefulness of drawing, or whatever. Oof. Again, I would think you would be, of all people, because you arrived kind of in the middle of this, and we were just getting going. And you didn't mention, we had Marty. We had a very, very sophisticated computer guy that took us someplace. And he definitely, my office is before and after Marty Dozier. He walked in with the computers. Yasushi, and one day we took all the drawing boards, we took all the mail lines off the desk, of 20 desks in a day. A Saturday, a weekend, sent them all to Kazuo, one of my associates in Tokyo, right? And started the computer. And it was just absolutely bizarre, just right. And then I went through a period of saying no more models, no more drawings, and we did that for a year. It was a disaster, and the models came back, because we couldn't do it without models. And we said, okay, that's not working. Let's try something else. And but it was an enormous kind of shift of thinking. But the thing that I think is so interesting, that I would think for young people would still be, you tell me, they just about take it for granted, because my two sons were on computers starting at 4 or 5 years old, and so they can't do this, or they're not interested in this. They don't even understand this. I'm trying to bring in finally a convention for the hand and the person in a very conventional sense, and so I'm trying to find, for me, the photograph of Annie in Milan of the facade is handmade. And it's kind of a bit funky, and it's not kind of perfect. It's what I want to do. I want to produce something that's still, the human character is still making something, and it's actually quite sophisticated, and it could have only come out of the digital world. But I'm still present as a human being that we call an architect that produces the thing, and I leave that presence in the work that other people identify. I could do that. That's something I could have made. And it's in a way irrelevant whether it's a mechanical tool or whether it's a digital tool. The realm of architecture, they're connected to much broader issues that are asking, what do people do? Oh, and it'd be another, I was going to show them, but I didn't. We're doing this the last work will be current work that are paintings.
Mhm.
You see those?
Yeah.
Yep.
We're developing the brain that makes the drawing, and we're inputting the DNA, and we're inputting the rules, which are more biological, of how they behave in an environment.
Mhm.
And then we look at 100 of them in the morning and go,
Mhm.
this one's interesting. Let's run another 100 and change the system a little bit, or change the DNA. But we're producing these things that are kind of incredibly kind of beautiful as drawings. And then also we could show you these lines, and I don't know, people you maybe don't know, but you could go in the old days to a Seligman or a Matthias Ungers who were really disciplined about the line, a Tangi, that a line had to be perfect. I was drawing.
Mhm.
I can see a drawing. There is no not perfect line.
Mhm.
They're all absolutely, and we can tune them within parts of millimeters and make them even more perfect, whatever you want to design perfect is. And it's an adjustment on my computer. It's a dial. You're changing a dial, right? And it's going to, again, everything we're talking about is going to have huge influence. If you're under 25, to me, you'd again, Satori, you're the guy I know. You would want to have some serious conversations. Kind of what's architecture even going to look like, even in a decade from now? We didn't touch AI, and it's just 3 years old? Literally a couple of years old, right? And it's already just moving at the speed of light. And it's a long ways from architecture, I think. That's another conversation. But it's not that long, but it can do certain tasks, right? And again, you just have to wait and see. And I'm an optimist, so I'm going to say it's good news that out of it will come huge opportunities, right? And it expands our ability as thinkers and as artists. And artists, I mean in a subjective sense. And that's another thing we didn't hit on, is subjectivity.
Mhm.
Some of the drawings I'm showing, I'm looking for the subjective. It's not, we can't agree on it. It's private to some degree. That does belong to me, right?
Yeah.
Oh, can I ask one last question? I think like you touches on like really interesting thing and topic, and about the subjectivity. Do you think like the subjectivity comes from your inner obsession, like really deep down unconsciousness? And do you think that this decision-making process or this subjectivity can be, let's say, like replaced by AI? So even like selecting like several paintings from like hundreds or thousands from them, like AI can do for you, like something like Thom Manye AI chooses like a painting for you, and then you agree on that. Like, do you think that will happen?
Not.
No.
No. I think it's kind of a fear.
Mhm.
We were write a recommendation for a certain student that has these qualities in the voice of Thom Manye. And in a nanosecond, you're reading this thing, it's scary. I didn't have to write it. I could change a couple words, frightening, but it's not thinking. It's absorbing everything that's on line of my voice and quickly able to, I guess, thinking in the sense of restructuring an argument based on a recommendation with my voice. But it's a kind of limited notion of thinking. It's closer to chess or Go, where there is a prescribed set of rules. And I would have said the art is kind of located, if you could locate it anywhere in the psychoanalytic terms, psychological terms, it'd be more in the eccentricity of the character and the part that doesn't follow logic. Logic I'm talking about in a social, cultural sense, et cetera, or even in a biological sense. That makes Kafka, right? Or makes Woody Allen. And I can't believe that that's reproducible. Or what if it is, it's a problem I don't have to deal with. I'll never have to deal with. But it doesn't. It would be actually the people that are so fearful that my first thinking would be, why don't you take that out to a conclusion? Would that be a problem if that did happen? Why is it scary? Maybe we should keep that conversation going and decide it'd be kind of interesting. You made up a Woody Allen, and it's not a Woody Allen. It's an invented AI person. I have no idea. Damn, how'd that happen? You've definitely got some interesting things going. We're producing very idiosyncratic drawings, but I'm feeding it in information that produces that idiot. So I could show you the stuff on that wall, the ones I showed you, and they're all about willfulness and chance. And so it's about chance behavior, which is random behavior, but it's happening in biological terms in a systematic way. So it's organized, right? It's not random finally. It's organizing eccentricity or uniqueness or chance, right? And again, that's a 100-year project that's been going on for, right? And again, when you look at some things like chess, of course, it can deal with millions of options and play them out to the end really quickly. And that's what a chess player does. And yes, a computer can do that a couple 100,000 times, and it can do it in a nanosecond. But it's a completely prescribed thing. There's no eccentricity in chess, and all of a sudden you can kind of sneak around and kind of miss the rule and go off the board and come in from behind. It doesn't happen. And it can't do that, because now that takes somebody that has an idea what sneaky means, right? And how to kind of break the rule. And even the notion of breaking the rule is kind of a creative act. You're looking at something going, oh, I can make this work by doing something. And it's an intellectual, it's an act of thinking. And it's going to be probably, in fact, I'm interested, recently I've been talking to a series of people, and I'm finding it's happening stronger in the business world and not in the academy.
Mhm.
They're doing it because of dinero, efficiency, right? And the academy is a little more relaxed. And my hunch is, my instinct is the academy is a bit behind at the moment. And they're they're over-invested in the looks of things. And what we thought was radical, which is super old school, right? Totally old school. That's 70s.
Right.
70s and 80s. And we got the bills.
Can I have one more question related to you?
Mm.
Yeah, I was very lucky enough to visit your studio at the UCLA a few years ago, and I was very inspired. The host of this event is a community of the researchers and young students who are thinking about an architecture in a society that are being transformed by information society, which we call an Architectural Informatics Association. And my question is, what are your expectations for the next generation studying architecture? Or what suggestion do you have for encouraging them?
The next generation of students. Yoshiki,
Yeah.
I have never had any strategical plan of where I'm going.
Mhm.
I show up
Mhm.
and I start asking questions. And if there's anything that I would say is practicing architecture for 50 years, is the lack of control I've had in my life.
Uh-huh.
I adjust and make very quick kind of shifts in my life having to do with the nature of what's taking place in front of me. And I think we live in a world that is so unpredictable, where the whole notion of future is an ancient idea, right? And it's ramped up so radically in the second half of the 20th century, or the 20th century, and definitely more so in this century, that it now operates at a global level that's so massive, right? And the changes that take place are so monumental that we can't possibly. It's hard to read the paper half. I live in a country which is politically going kind of backwards or going someplace. I have no clue. I wake up in the morning, I have to read the paper to figure out what the hell world I live in, right? And I have no control of it. But I think as architects, because we deal in, it's so connected to political, social, cultural, right, as well as infrastructural and urban, that if anything, the young people have to be mobile, flexible, malleable, right? And you wake up in the morning and decide I'm going this way or that way, or the phone rings and you say yes or no.
Yeah.
Right. And now you use that and make some sort of an opportunity, but it's not strategical. It has to do with a very, very fluid motion coming through life. But I think maybe more just about maybe everybody, because it's not just architecture. Maybe that is the nature of being a young person today, that you definitely have to have a comfort with the reality of that fluidity, because you don't know. Again, I talk to all the young people I'm talking to, and the people coming out of school or students are kind of struggling. And what do I do in this world?
Mhm.
Where do I fit? It's complicated. And it used to be, I just took over my mom's shop, and it's now my shop. And I'm making shoes, and I took over my dad's shoemaking thing. It was kind of simple. That's right. Or you were on the farm. I come from a family one generation away. My father was one of 4 siblings on a classic Midwestern farm, and you had 4 kids to run the farm. And then you get the farm and do it again. And his mother and father got the farm from there. Simple. And you fix the tractor and you build a barn, right? And you sold corn. And then he went to college and was the one that escaped and went someplace else. And here we go. But today, there is, though, that continuity is just about disappeared in our world, right? And again, as architect students, what's it? Oh, you talk to me where your friends are. You get an opportunity and you're in LA, you're going to be anywhere. You'll be in Beijing, you'll be in Ghana, you'll be in Vienna, you'll be wherever it is that there's an opportunity that's open to you, right? And the whole notion of geography of location has kind of gone away. Very few people think about staying in their hometown with mom and dad too much anymore, right? In fact, if anything, it's reverse. People kind of assume they're getting out of that hometown and moving someplace else. I'm looking at the people around me are from all over the world, right? And it's in some way purposeful, I would say.
Yeah, it makes sense very, very well. And you said always being on the way of the exploration must be the secret of your suggestions, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you so much.